Yo, what's up everyone? It's Jade here, and like I said in my last video, I got this weird text telling me to go to this address. It warned me not to tell Heather about it. I was curious, so I went, and what I saw was messed up. Iris, the cheerleader, was giving Theo a blowjob while her boyfriend, Asher, was watching and jerking off. Talk about messed up. But the craziest part was, when they switched places, my fiancée, Heather, showed up. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll leave the link in the description. Now, let's pick up where we left off. Jade, Newell. Heather screamed as soon as she saw me at the door. She started sobbing, eyes wide with fear. How did you get here? How did you find out? Theo, you swore you'd never tell him. She cried, her voice choked with panic. I glanced around the room. Iris was standing in the corner, looking confused, trying to cover her naked body with her hands. Asher was standing there awkwardly, head down, both his hands covering himself. Theo, the guy who was supposed to be my friend, was standing there, grinning like a maniac. He turned and looked at me with a scornful glance. Oh, look who's here. It's Jade, my old pal. Honey, I never said I'd tell Jade about us, but I never said I wouldn't let him know. Theo laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the room as if he had won some kind of victory. Theo pointed a chin toward Heather, his voice hardening. Now, if you know what's good for you, you'll shut your mouth, get your butt over here, and start doing what I tell you. Right now, Doe. He barked the command. Unbelievable. Heather actually did what he said. Tears streamed down her face. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, but I kept myself composed. I started to walk toward them, but Theo just sneered at me. He mumbled some mocking sounds, as if this was all some big joke to him. I wouldn't touch you, you scum, I said, my voice full of hate, my eyes locked on him. I turned to Heather, my voice cold and firm. Heather, your behavior is unacceptable. I don't want to marry you anymore. You will never be my wife under any circumstances. Give me back the ring. I pulled the engagement ring off her finger, the pain and disappointment swirling in my chest. Theo shouted again, all arrogance. I said, satisfy me now. Heather, still crying, reluctantly continued to do what he wanted right in front of me. My anger reached its peak. I stared at Theo, feeling like I couldn't take it anymore. I owe you one, Theo, I said, trying to contain myself. You've saved me from the biggest mistake of my life, marrying her. Thanks for showing me what kind of person she really is. Theo just scoffed, no remorse on his face. Hold on, Jade. I think you need to know a little more, he said, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Did you know I took Heather's virginity the night of the prom? I've been sleeping with her ever since, regularly, twice a week. And I always send her back to you, all marked up for you. I clenched my fist but fought to keep my anger under control. Theo continued to regale me with his depravity, including the details of his exploits with Asher and Iris, then commanded me to sit down and watch him abuse Heather. He thought I would do it. That will never happen, Theo, I said, my voice hardening. You're worse than her if you think I would even consider it for a second. Theo didn't stop. He gestured for Alden to come out from behind a file cabinet, holding a gun. Alden cocked the weapon, the click of the bullet echoing menacingly. We don't want anyone to get hurt, Jade, Alden said, his eyes fixed on me. But you will do exactly what Theo says, no choice. I looked right at Alden and laughed. You're a bunch of clowns, I said, dripping with sarcasm. You won't shoot. You think you'll explain shooting an unarmed man with 3 witnesses as he walks away from the scene. Let me tell you. The only reason I'm letting you live tonight is because you will be supporting my ex-fiancée from now on. You want her? You can have her, but don't expect anything from me. I turned and walked out of the room with confidence, not even bothering to look back. None of them had the guts to pull the trigger. The anger inside me subsided a little as I walked away from the building. A few days later, a call from Heather's dad didn't surprise me. He wanted to know why I called off the wedding. Ask your daughter. She knows exactly why, I answered bluntly. I did, but she won't say anything other than to tell me to persuade you to change your mind, he responded, sounding worried. I expected this. After getting his number, I sent him a short video clip of Heather and Theo. When I heard the heavy breathing from the other end of the line, I simply hung up. I knew I didn't need to explain further. All our mutual friends tried to convince me to forgive Heather, but I refused. Anyone who chose her is no longer my friend, I said simply. I packed up all of Heather's things and delivered them to her house one afternoon. My life went on without her, I received an invitation to Iris and Asher's wedding, but I declined. They were now just part of the past. Time passed, and I heard rumors about Heather. She was pregnant and had been dumped by Theo. Now she was living with her parents, a single mom. People talked about her, but I didn't care. I cut all ties with her and didn't want to hear anything more. I lived my life, avoiding any kind of commitment. I didn't trust anyone anymore, not after what Heather and Iris had done. The scars were too deep. One night, I walked into Connie's bar grill, my usual escape from everything. It was quiet, a place where I could be alone, undisturbed. I was planning on having a drink by myself, but when I walked in, I noticed the tense atmosphere. 5 guys were harassing the only woman in the bar besides the bartender. She looked familiar, then I recognized her, Heather. Heather was standing in the middle of them, trembling, but trying to stay composed. "I'm here to find Jade Phillips. I hear he comes here often," she said, her voice cracking with fear. One of the guys laughed nastily. "Jade? You won't even remember his name after we're done with you." I was about to walk out, but hearing her call my name ignited a struggle inside me. Jade, please. I need to talk to you. Please, for God's sake, help me." The 5 guys just laughed at her. "You're out of luck, sweetheart. He's not going to get involved. Besides, he knows we'll chop him to pieces if he tries to get between us and the new kitty." I froze, hearing Heather call my name, her voice laced with desperation. She was in danger, and even though every instinct in me was screaming to turn around and walk away, I knew I couldn't leave her in that situation. If I did, those guys would be merciless. Damn it. I cursed under my breath, the frustration exploding as I realized I had to do what I didn't want to. I walked toward them, pushing right between the guys like a storm, firmly shoving Heather behind me. The bastards turned to look at me, not seeming too surprised. "So what the hell do you think you're doing, big guy?" one of them asked, his eyes flashing with defiance. "She's ours, can't you see?" I silently clenched my fists, the anger building in my chest. "You can call her whatever you want, but no one, not even a woman like her, deserves to be humiliated when she doesn't want to be," I said forcefully. Another one of them laughed, full of scorn. "Oh, so what are you going to do about it?" "There's 5 of us and just you, Jade, going to try to rescue her. She's just a useless slut anyway." I took another step, my eyes burning into each one of them. "I might be outnumbered, but let me make this clear. I won't let any of you touch her, even if it costs me my life. If you want to try it, be prepared to die today. Which one of you wants to be first?" They all stopped, looking at me with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. They didn't take me seriously as a threat. I knew I didn't have a lot of chance, but if I had to die to keep them from hurting Heather, I wouldn't back down. I charged forward, using all the strength I had, but with 5 of them I didn't stand a chance. They easily took me down, slamming me to the floor, pinning me down. One sat on my chest, his fist repeatedly slamming into my face. Everything faded into pain and blood. I thought this was it, but then, the bar door burst open violently. A tall figure rushed in, and in a matter of seconds, everything changed. The guy who was sitting on my chest was instantly knocked off, and the man began to take down the rest. I recognized him, Finn, Connie's brother, the bar owner. Finn grew up with me, and he always saw me as a hero. When we were kids, I stood up for his little sister against bullies, and now he was returning the favor by saving my life. While Finn took down 3 of them, I struggled to get up, wincing in pain, and attacked the other 2 with all the fight I had left. Soon, all 5 guys were lying unconscious on the floor. Finn reached out and pulled me to my feet. "I've been waiting for a chance to return the favor, Jade. Thanks for what you did for me and my sister back in the day." I offered a weak smile, blood still dripping from the corner of my mouth. "Thanks, Finn. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't gotten here in time." Connie came over and kissed me on the cheek, her voice full of gratitude. "Thank you, Jade. If it hadn't been for you years ago, I wouldn't have this life. I'll never forget your kindness." But as I looked at Heather, the anger inside me flared up again. "What the hell were you thinking, Heather? Coming to a place like this? Women don't come here unless they want to be humiliated?" I barked at her, unable to contain my frustration. Heather looked down, her eyes filled with pain. "I just desperately wanted to talk to you, Jade. I never thought things would turn out like this. But you saved me, you risked your life for me. That must mean something, right? I only did it because of the memory of what we had, not out of any feelings I have now." I snapped, the anger surging beyond my control. She'd betrayed me, and now she was dragging me into this mess. Heather started to cry. She tried to wipe the blood from my face with a piece of fabric from her dress, but I pushed her hand away. "Don't touch me," I roared, my eyes filled with contempt. "Get out and don't ever come back. And next time I won't be there to save you." Heather ran out of the bar, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, but for me, it was too late. That night, on a Wednesday in early December, the doorbell rang unexpectedly as I was watching a football game on TV. Looking through the peephole, I was surprised to see Heather standing there. She was alone, no baby in sight. I felt nothing but annoyance. I didn't want to talk to her and wasn't curious about why she was there. Without hesitation, I ignored her, turning up the TV volume to drown out any thought of her presence outside. But Heather wasn't easily deterred. She kept pushing the doorbell, as if she wanted the whole world to know she was there. The persistent ringing only increased my annoyance, to the point I had to get up, go to the electrical panel, and shut off the circuit breaker to silence the doorbell. As the quiet returned, I was content to resume my game without interruption. Finally, she gave up and went home close to 11 p.m. I knew she'd have to be at work early tomorrow, and hoped this would be the last time I saw her on my doorstep. But I was wrong. The next day, she persisted, this time bringing a bag of dinner. When I got home from work, I discovered Heather still sitting patiently on my porch. Her thin coat couldn't possibly shield her from the cold, but she didn't move. I looked past her, not stopping, and not planning to engage in conversation. Instead, I decided to drive straight to Henderson, staying there until almost 11 that night. When I returned, Heather was gone. Friday afternoon, she was back. This time, as I stepped over her to go inside, I couldn't resist asking, "What do you want?" Heather looked at me, her voice soft. "I just want to talk to you, to explain everything." I took a deep breath, feeling the annoyance rising. "I don't want to talk about anything," I said curtly and urged her to leave. But she persisted, patiently sitting outside my front door, knocking so much that I was forced to call the sheriff to complain about being harassed. Surprisingly, when the sheriff asked her to leave, Heather complied. However, early Saturday morning, she was back, sitting on my porch from 7 a.m., and not knocking until 9. I endured, saying through the door, "Go away." But this time she didn't knock. She just sat there all day, all night, motionless like a statue in the freezing cold. When I went out to check at 5 a.m., passing by the door to get to the bathroom, Heather was still sitting there. I chuckled to myself, thinking that the cold would surely chase her away soon enough. But no, things only got worse as she stayed there for 6 straight weeks. For Christmas and New Year's Day, she still persisted, sitting outside my front door. A neighbor offered her use of the bathroom, otherwise her time was spent sitting on my porch. I couldn't understand her tenacity. She kept going to work, but as soon as she got off, she was back sitting there, day, night, rain or shine. I even considered getting a restraining order, but then thought that enduring the cold was punishment enough. Finally, on a late Friday night in January, the weather turned exceptionally brutal. A winter storm hit with hail and the temperature plummeted to 29 to 31 degrees F. I knew that Heather couldn't possibly withstand it much longer. When I went out to check early the next morning, she was still huddled on my porch, shaking from the cold. The rain had soaked her to the bone, and her thin coat couldn't possibly protect her from the icy chill. If she didn't get warm, she would freeze to death. A strange kind of frustration rose in my chest. I couldn't understand why she was doing this to herself. Pushing open the door, I shouted at her, "What do you want?" She looked at me, speechless as she shivered uncontrollably. Her teeth were chattering. Despite my anger, compassion started to creep in. I sighed and dragged her inside. "Get in the bathroom and take a hot shower. I'll leave some dry clothes for you. If you don't warm up soon, you're gonna freeze out there, you idiot." Heather didn't say anything, just nodded in thanks and silently went toward the bathroom. I knew the hot water wouldn't last that long, but it was the only option. I grabbed a pair of sweatpants and a loose-fitting t-shirt, leaving them outside the bathroom. When Heather came out, she looked worse than the last time I saw her. Her body was thinner, weaker than before. I guessed she hadn't been taking care of herself during all this time. I had a simple breakfast ready for her, with eggs and bacon. "Sit down and eat," I ordered, my voice still a little sharp. "I brought an orange for breakfast," she mumbled. I chuckled lightly but with sarcasm. "I threw that rock in the garbage. Sit down and eat before I change my mind." We sat across from each other, eating in silence. Each of us had our own thoughts hidden behind our glances, but no words were spoken. Heather ate as if she hadn't eaten in ages, like a woman starved for days. She looked thinner and weaker than the last time I'd seen her. Obviously, she'd neglected herself. It only made me more frustrated, partly out of pity, partly because I didn't want to let any feelings surface. After the meal was finished, I pushed my chair back and sat across from her. Heather was going to stand up to clear the table, but I stopped her, ordering gruffly, "Leave it. I'll get it. We need to finish this." I looked her directly in the eye, continuing coldly, "I've made it clear I don't want anything to do with you. I don't want to see you, talk to you, or have you show up on my doorstep. But for some reason you think you have the right to make me miserable as if I haven't suffered enough. So you won't stop until you have your say, will you? Then, say your piece and get out of my life forever." Heather looked up at me, her voice trembling but firm. "You're right, Jade. I don't deserve to be with you, but I have things to say. And I can't let you leave until I've said them." I sighed, feeling the anger rise but trying to remain calm. "All right, you've proven that you can survive without me." "I got that," I said quickly, wanting to push the story to an end. Heather wouldn't back down, responding, "You're right, I can live without you, but I don't want to." I gritted my teeth, the annoyance showing more clearly on my face. "Whatever, just say it and get out, for God's sake, once and for all." She looked at me, her eyes full of love and admiration, but that wasn't what I wanted to see. I knew she was trying to claw her way back into my heart, but the guilt and resentment were too strong. Heather took a deep breath, appearing determined to grab this one chance she had. She began to tell me, her voice shaking but full of emotion, "For the first time, I'm going to tell you the whole truth. I'm not holding anything back. I've wanted to tell you for so long, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand why I had to hide it. I'm begging you to listen to everything I say, then I will never bother you again, unless you want me to." I crossed my arms and leaned back in my chair, replying coldly, "Well, finally, you're ready to talk. Say all you want to say, then get out of my life." Heather started talking about prom night. What she'd said before I still remembered, but this time she went into more detail, revealing things I never imagined. She told me about how Theo tricked her into going to his office after prom and raped her. Not only Theo, but his brother, Alden, participated. Alden filmed everything, blackmailing her with edited clips that made it look like she was willingly participating. Each word she spoke was like a knife cutting through my heart. I sat in silence, unable to speak. The rage inside me boiled over as I listened to Heather talk about how Theo threatened to get her family fired from their jobs if she didn't give in to him. And even worse, when she said she hid it from me because she was afraid I'd go after Theo and end up spending my life in prison, I honestly didn't know how to keep myself calm. Heather went on to tell me about her parents' reaction when she confided in them. Instead of protecting her, they demanded she appease Theo to keep her job and avoid trouble. The love she had for her parents died that night, she said. I could feel the bitterness in her voice as she mentioned it. So then she got to her son, Boyd, the child she'd had as a result of the rape. Every word, every sentence she spoke was soaked in pain and regret. I felt my heart sink heavier than ever. Finally, she stopped and took a sip of orange juice. I didn't know what to say. The feelings inside me were a mix of pity, anger that Theo had gotten away with it, and resentment that she hadn't told me sooner. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I needed to be clear before making any decisions. "Heather, before I make up my mind, I need to know what you're planning to do about the baby." Her eyes went blank for a moment, then she whispered, "Honestly, I don't know. I can't abandon him to an orphanage. He's innocent and part of me. I can't not love him." Her words choked me up. I understood that she loved the baby, but I couldn't bear the thought of living with the memory of Theo, the man who had destroyed my life and hers. I couldn't love that child, couldn't accept him, no matter how innocent he was. I looked straight into Heather's eyes. "Speaking seriously, I understand how you feel, but I can't be around a child like that. Every time I look at him, all I'll think about is Theo, all the things he did to us. I could never be that kid's father. So have you considered putting him up for adoption?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do that, Jade. That's wrong. And I can't imagine my child living in a place like that." I was silent, frustration and disappointment welling up. She could love the kid, but I couldn't. I stood up, looking at Heather one last time, then said straight out, "I'm sorry, but I can't." Don't ever come back, as long as you're involved with Theo's son. So Sunday I went to visit Gertrude, the friend I could always count on for sound advice. My mind was in turmoil, conflicted about Heather. After what she had told me, the effort she had gone to in trying to explain, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Part of me hated Heather for what she had done, for all the trouble she had dragged me into. But another part of me still loved her, just like the very first day, and that made me feel torn, not knowing what to do with those feelings. As I entered Gertrude's house, I was about to excuse myself as soon as I saw that she had another visitor. But before I could speak, Gertrude grabbed my hand, smiling, and insisted I stay. "Darlene, this is my good friend Jade," she introduced. "He's the one I was telling you about." "Jade, this is my niece, Darlene. She's staying with me for 6 to 8 weeks to finish her college thesis." I smiled politely, trying not to show my emotions. Darlene, a captivating blonde, spoke in a honey-sweet southern accent. "Yes, I need quiet to focus on writing. School is too noisy, and my aunt is great for advice. She's told me a lot of nice things about you." Even though I tried to avoid it, I couldn't help but notice Darlene's beauty. But respecting Gertrude was most important to me. I quickly looked away, trying not to let myself get caught up in unnecessary thoughts. Gertrude looked at me and chuckled, seeming to understand what was going through my mind. "She's engaged, Jade. Don't worry. Now, come in. What brings you to see me?" Darlene politely excused herself to her room so we could talk privately. I told Gertrude everything, holding nothing back about my recent encounter with Heather at my apartment. I talked about what Heather had shared, from being raped by Theo to her desperate efforts to convey the truth to me. I explained that my feelings for Heather were incredibly complex. I loved her and hated her at the same time. Loved her for the memories and for all the lengths she had gone to protect me, but hated her for what she had hidden, for the betrayal I couldn't forgive yet. I admitted that if I had known the truth about Theo sooner, I probably would have killed him and spent the rest of my life in prison. Gertrude listened silently, her eyes focused as if analyzing every word I spoke. After a long moment of contemplation, she stood up and walked to the bookcase, scanning the shelves until she found the book she was looking for. She handed me a book by Louis Benedictus Meads. "Then read a passage. Forgiveness is the release of the offender from the prison that is your resentment. It's the discovery that the person you have resented is, in fact, your prisoner. Forgiveness does not erase the past. A healed memory is not a forgotten one. Instead, forgiveness creates a new way of remembering the unforgettable." She looked at me, her voice gentle but firm. "Jade, if you keep dwelling in regret, you'll stay stuck in the past. What matters is what you do now." I felt a sense of relief listening to those words. Gertrude always knew how to help me see things more clearly, like the mother I had lost so young. I hugged her, silently thankful for her wisdom and friendship. We parted ways, both feeling much better than when I'd arrived. After that conversation, everything in my head about Heather and Theo seemed to clear up. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday morning, I heard a gentle knock on my door. This was strange, because the doorbell had been fixed a while ago. I opened the door and saw Heather standing there, dressed nicely and carrying 2 canvas tote bags. Her face looked haggard but determined. "I thought I told you not to come back," I said curtly, the coldness in my voice obvious. "We had a deal, remember?" Her voice was weak, but determined. "Jade, I did what you asked. Boyd's been placed in foster care. I gave up all my parental rights. My parents didn't agree with my decision and kicked me out. They say Theo will eventually come looking for Boyd and wanting to be a father, but I told them I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. Now I have nowhere to go. Debbie, a coworker of mine, dropped me off here. I just wanted to tell you that before I went to the Salvation Army to get a room." Her words hit me like a shock. She actually did what I'd asked, gave up the baby. I stood there, disbelieving my ears. What was I supposed to do now? Leave her out in the street? I stepped out, grabbed her 2 bags, and said, "Come inside, then we'll talk." Heather looked at Debbie, gave her a weak smile, and waved goodbye. Debbie nodded in response and drove away. I brought Heather inside, setting her bags by the door. I started talking, holding nothing back. As we both know, every action has consequences. Now you're homeless because of my decision. This is a 2-bedroom apartment. You can stay in the spare room. I won't charge rent, but you have to keep it clean, cook, and help with chores. And one more thing, if I bring another woman home, you stay away. Don't approach me or ask me for anything. Got it? Heather smiled, a bright smile I couldn't forget. I'll do whatever you ask. Thank you, Jade, for helping me. I promise, only good things will come your way from now on. I nodded, accepting the situation silently. Heather started to put away her things, organizing the spare room. The apartment was gradually becoming more organized, the kind of place I'd once dreamed of sharing with her, but things were far from that now. I still didn't know what would happen next, but at least, for now, I could keep things under control. On a Friday morning, nearing the end of the first week of Heather and I living together, I received a strange call from a lawyer named Grant Maston. He requested to meet with me immediately, but with my busy morning schedule, I could only schedule a meeting for lunch at 12:30. I had a feeling this was serious, but he refused to say anything more over the phone. I arrived at the lawyer's office on time, after a quick lunch. In my head, I was spinning with vague predictions of what was about to happen, but couldn't pinpoint anything concrete. "Mr. Jade Phillips?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, that's me," I replied, trying to stay composed. "So I'm Grant Maston. Please, come in." He shook my hand and led me into his office. He began speaking, no beating around the bush. You're wondering why I've called you today. Let me make it clear from the beginning that you're not in any legal trouble. Quite the opposite. You're about to come into quite a bit of money. At that, my stomach clenched. Grant continued to explain and presented 3 documents for me to sign. I'm not one to be easily swayed by empty promises, so I immediately asked, "Hold on, I'm not signing anything until I know exactly what I'm signing." Grant paused, sighing as if he was used to this type of reaction. "I apologize for rushing you. I know you have questions. Here's the story. Your father, Bernard Phillips, invested all of his savings in a small startup company called Accurate Deliveries. He owned 90% of the company before he passed, and that stake is now yours, the legal heir." I was stunned as I heard this. From having nothing but a steady job, I was suddenly the owner of a delivery company. Grant gave me 3 documents to sign, and after reading them to make sure everything was clear, I put my signature on them, still feeling like I was dreaming. "Thank you, Mr. Phillips, and congratulations. The company is officially yours. All you need to do is send a portion of the yearly profits to the anonymous investor, who holds the remaining 10% stake. The other 90% is yours." I walked out of the lawyer's office in a daze. My life had completely changed in just a few hours. I was a company owner. The first thing I thought of was Heather. Even though things were complicated between us, she was the first person I wanted to share this joy with. I drove to the textile mill where Heather worked. But when I got there, the supervisor told me she was on break. I couldn't wait until she finished her shift, so I left an envelope for her, slipping an extra $20 to the security guard to make sure he delivered it promptly. 15 minutes later, Heather hurried out, her face full of concern. "Jade, what happened? Why did you make me leave work in the middle of my shift? Is there something wrong with someone?" I looked at her, smiling enigmatically. No accidents. You don't need this job anymore?" Heather was surprised, her eyes widening. "What are you talking about? If I don't have a job, how will I pay my way?" I answered, my gaze evasive. "Because you're going to have a different job now." She frowned in confusion, but I told her to get in the car, promising to explain later. We stopped by a women's clothing store, and I told her to buy a new outfit from head to toe. From the smallest things like underwear to dresses and shoes, I wanted her to look stunning. She hesitated, but I insisted, and she agreed. After the shopping spree, I took her back to the apartment and told her to get ready for a special dinner. I had to go back to work, but tonight was the night we were going to have a real talk. When I got back to the company, I told Jason, my former boss, about my meeting with the lawyer and the sudden change in my life. Jason, whom I always respected, put his hand on my shoulder, congratulating me. "I knew about this, Jade, but I was asked to keep it under wraps until it was official. I'm so proud of you and will be here to help in any way you need." I couldn't believe Jason knew, but I was happy he was willing to stay on to help me transition. When I got home, Heather was ready, looking stunning in her new outfit. The scent of her perfume brought back memories. She looked at me with anticipation. "Let's go. We're having dinner at Ches Roberts," I said. "Ches Roberts? Why such a fancy dinner?" she asked, confused. I looked at her, my gaze softening. "I was going to take you there on prom night before everything went wrong. Now I want us to make new memories, better ones. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right?" In the intimate atmosphere of the upscale restaurant, amid the cozy ambience and soft lights, I told her about the sudden change in my life. Heather started to cry, not out of sadness but out of happiness for me. "Heather," I said, looking directly into her eyes, "when I heard the news, the first person I thought of was you. It's time we forget the past and focus on the present. I'll never forget what happened, but I can forgive. We can start again, slowly, but we'll walk together." Heather hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. That night, we didn't just enjoy a meal, we began a new journey. 2 weeks after Heather started working at Accurate Deliveries, she quickly adapted to her new job. In fact, she loved it. After years of doing dull work at the textile mill, taking apart bolts of fabric, working as a secretary at the delivery company gave her a sense of freshness and excitement. Juanita, Heather's predecessor, was about to leave for a baby and become a stay-at-home mom. Her position was now Heather's, and she not only enjoyed the work, but was proud to be earning a much higher salary than before. Heather commuted to work with me every day. Every morning we sat side by side in the car, but our conversations were still a bit strained. Still, I could see her enthusiasm for her new work, and it made me think about her past and ours. Heather was now a whiz at customer service and handling all the office duties with professionalism. But there was something that still made me uneasy. Even though the company was thriving, there was an underlying discomfort in my gut, something I couldn't explain. Something about this inheritance didn't feel quite right. Everything had been too smooth, but there were no documents to prove the investment my father supposedly made in Accurate Deliveries. I'd examined every word in the lawyer's documents, but couldn't find any concrete evidence of the transaction. It just wouldn't let me stop thinking about it. During lunch that day, I decided to act. I drove to Robinson's Investigations, a private detective agency. Leon Robinson, the owner, listened to my story. "I need to know exactly what happened," I began. "There's no paperwork showing that my dad ever invested any money. It's all just talk. I feel something's off and need answers. Not just snippets of the story, I need the whole truth." Leon nodded in agreement. "I understand. I'll dig into every nook and cranny, but you need to know that this information will be legally inadmissible without official testimony. However, if you just want the truth, I can do that." "That's right, I don't care about the legal implications. I just want the truth, but keep it confidential. No one can know you're investigating this." "Don't worry, Mr. Phillips. At Robinson's Investigations, confidentiality is paramount. I'll start right away and get in touch with you as soon as I have something." I paid for the investigation to begin and left, feeling a mix of anticipation and a little anxiety. 5 days later, Heather called me from Leon's office. He wanted to meet with me immediately. At precisely 3 p.m., I sat across from Leon in his office. "I want to keep this confidential as much as possible. That's why I came to you directly," I said. "I understand," Leon replied. "Before we begin, I need to ask, are you sure you want to know the answer? If you're happy with how things are going, it's best to let sleeping dogs lie." I took a deep breath. I need the truth. Whatever it is, I need to know. Leon looked at me for a long moment, then began. "I and my team interviewed several people, including the housekeeper, lawyer, and even employees at your company. No one knew they were being investigated." "Perfect. So what did you find?" I asked, my heart pounding. Leon paused for a moment, then said, "This story involves Heather." I was stunned. "Heather? How is she involved in any of this?" "She's the one who started it all. About 5 weeks ago, she went to see Bruno Sir and Henrietta Cohn, Theo's parents. Heather told them that Theo had raped her at prom and that Alden participated, even filming it. She had been blackmailed by Theo, and her family was threatened with job loss if they didn't comply with his demands." I clenched my fists. As I heard this, I felt a surge of anger in my chest. Leon continued. "Heather demanded the Cohns pay her $500,000 in exchange for her silence and a sworn statement that Theo wasn't involved with Boyd. She also set up a trust fund for Boyd from that money." I was speechless. Heather hadn't kept a single dime for herself. Everything she'd done was for me and Boyd. And on top of that, she made sure Theo couldn't hurt her or Boyd ever again. Leon finished his story. "It was all discreet, no one knew. She sacrificed everything for you." As I heard this, I felt like I had been knocked off my feet. Heather had done the unthinkable. She'd fought bravely and sacrificed everything for me, for Boyd, and for justice. Tears welled up, but this time, they were tears of gratitude and love. I left Leon's office feeling heavy, but clearer than ever. I had to do something to repay this woman. Heather deserved to be forgiven, and more than that, she deserved my love and respect. That Saturday night, while I was still thinking about everything, Theo Cohn strolled into Henderson as usual, looking for some weekend fun. Theo was the type who always used his family's wealth and position to get whatever he wanted. Everyone knew his bad reputation, but many women were still drawn to his looks and the Cohn family's wealth. Theo was usually successful in gaining the trust of these girls only to break it later. Theo spotted a stunning blonde sitting alone at the bar and, as always, approached her with smooth flattery. "I know you don't want to hear this, but you're certainly the prettiest woman here tonight," Theo purred. "May I buy you a drink?" She smiled at Theo but immediately raised her hand, showing off her ring. "Engaged," she replied, "but I'll accept a free drink if I'm offered." Theo wasn't deterred. He ordered the bartender give her whatever she wants, my treat. And with his typical arrogance, Theo added, "A ring never stopped me before." The girl smiled, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. "That doesn't surprise me," she said in a sweet southern drawl. "You seem like the type who gets whatever he wants." Theo laughed. "You don't know." All night, the blonde continued to tease Theo and keep him interested. He kept offering drinks and trying to pull her into his plans, but she just dragged it out, keeping Theo on the hook. When the clock struck 11 p.m., the girl announced that she needed to go pack for her trip home tomorrow. Theo, unwilling to let his catch slip away, tried to convince her. "Let me drive you home. I have something I want to give you, and it won't take much time. I promise you'll leave town with a smile on your face," Theo urged, his voice laced with sensuality. But the girl declined politely. "I don't think so. I really need to go. Thanks for the drinks and the banner." Just as Theo was about to grab her arm, a strong grip circled his wrist, causing him to stop abruptly. Three large men stepped between Theo and the girl, asking with calm but firm voices, Ma'am, is this man bothering you?" The girl looked Theo directly in the eye, her gaze cold and determined. "What about you, Theo?" she asked, implying that he knew he didn't stand a chance. Theo, realizing the situation was not in his favor, backed down and muttered, "Just a little misunderstanding. So no harm done. I hope you have a safe trip home." With that, Theo left the bar, his anger bubbling over. However, when Theo got to his car and was about to leave, the unexpected happened. As he pressed the button to unlock the car, a forceful blow from behind slammed into his head, knocking Theo unconscious. The next morning, Theo woke up disoriented and in pain. The pain in his groin made him fully awake. As he tried to piece things together, Theo realized something horrific. Part of his body, the thing he was so proud of, was gone. He screamed in panic as he discovered the truth. Theo had been robbed of a part of his life, a part he used to control and hurt so many women. Stumbling out of his car in a panic, Theo started to walk along the highway, trying to find help. After hours of agony, a kind-hearted farmer picked him up and drove him to the hospital. After Theo was admitted, his condition was so serious that there was no time to wait. Doctors immediately made a diagnosis and began treatment. Theo's injuries were too severe to save the missing part, and they had to perform emergency surgery to maintain his bladder function. Theo understood his life would be permanently changed. When Theo's parents arrived at the hospital, the situation became even more tense. His father, full of rage, swore he would hunt down whoever had inflicted such a brutal injury on his son. He immediately called the sheriff and demanded this matter be investigated to the fullest. The sheriff mobilized his investigative team, dispatching them to the scene to gather evidence from Theo's Cadillac. Their numerous fingerprints were found on the passenger side, but only Theo's prints were on the driver's side, making it difficult to identify the assailant. As the police reviewed the security footage from the parking lot, they noticed Theo stumbling out of the bar, clearly intoxicated. Shortly after, an attacker approached him from behind, delivered a powerful blow to his head, rendering him unconscious, then forced him into the back seat of the Cadillac and drove away. The subject was wearing a full disguise, concealing his face expertly. Notably, the gang tattoo was visible on his hand and neck. Despite expanding the search and detaining several gang members for questioning, no concrete evidence directly linked them to Theo's assault. The case went cold, greatly disappointing the Cohn family. During the investigation, police also focused on Theo's list of enemies, and one name stood out, Jade, my name. When the two detectives arrived on Sunday afternoon, I was prepared but had to keep my composure. Heather was right there, and I didn't want to cause her any further worry. They asked questions about Theo, examined my hands and neck to see if I had any tattoos similar to those in the security footage. Of course, they didn't find anything. My hair color was also much lighter than the attackers, and I didn't have a ponytail. Everything aligned with my story. When they asked what I thought about Theo, I didn't hesitate to express my opinion. I told them Theo was a scumbag, and I'd done my best to stay away from him for years. Then they wanted to search my apartment. I had nothing to hide, so I freely allowed them in. The search was quick, and they found nothing suspicious. I asked about my whereabouts the night Theo was attacked. I remembered that night playing poker with some friends until late. I gave them my friends' names, and they indicated they'd check their alibis. Before leaving, they emphasized that they didn't think I was involved, just a formality. That night, as Heather nestled in my arms, she hesitantly asked, "How did you do it?" I wasn't sure what she was asking, so I replied, "Do what?" "Didn't you attack Theo that night? Because of me?" she asked directly, her eyes looking at me questioningly. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight in my chest. There was no point in hiding it anymore. Yes, Theo did too many terrible things to both you and me. He thought he'd get away with it, but he was wrong. What he did to you, and to me, was unforgivable. His punishment, I think, fits his crimes. She looked at me intently, a moment of silence, then she continued, "I knew it. How did you manage to do it so cleanly?" I chuckled softly. I was prepared. "After I found out what he did to you, I drove 200 miles to the big city and bought 2 temporary gang tattoos, similar to the ones in the video. They only needed water to stick on and could be washed off with soap and water afterwards. That night, I disguised myself thoroughly and attacked him in the parking lot. After taking him down, I used gloves and carefully did the rest. I knew the security cameras would catch it, but it was okay. Everything was planned out." I continued with the details, trying to keep my voice calm. I used a cable tie to cut off blood flow to his genitals, then used a box cutter to cut it off. I placed it on the hood of the car where it would get scorched in the sun. Then I wiped down every fingerprint, put on gloves, and put everything in a black bag. Then drove off and found a place to burn the evidence. Heather was speechless for a moment, then she softly said, "You were so kind. If it were me, he probably wouldn't be alive. I thank you, Jade. You avenged my honor." From then on, we continued to live together. Heather gave birth to 2 children, and even though I never proposed to her, we lived as a happy family. I never bothered with a legal marriage, and she didn't request it. I knew she had sacrificed so much, and I loved her more than anyone else. As for Theo, the attack became a forgotten secret. I was never accused, never questioned by the police again. Heather never revealed what she knew, and I trusted that my secret would always be safe with her. As for her son, Boyd, he grew up in foster care but eventually became a champion of justice, a district attorney prosecuting the likes of Theo and protecting those like Heather.